I was born in 2000. 4 years later, I got a brother called Yannick. When he was born, I was 4 and totally ready to be his big sister. Because my parents saw how much I loved to care for him, they took me along in their upbringing. When I was 4 years old, I basically learned how to be a mom. That's why I know so much about the way my parents raised me, because they taught me how to raise my brother the same way. And that is also why I always stayed interested in the upbringing of children. But people please, hear me right. I'm not here to tell you how to raise children or to tell you what's wrong or what's right. I'm not a pedagogue. I'm just someone who is interested in the upbringing of children and got the chance to spend time researching it. I started to research the upbringing of children, and the first thing I found was a Netflix documentary about the beginning of life. In the first 3 minutes of the first episode, Charles Nelson, pediatrician and neuroscientist at Harvard Medical School and Boston Children's Hospital, said, "The first few years of a child are very much like building the frame of a house. You're constructing a framework upon which everything else will develop." This statement about the upbringing of children interested me right away, but it also raised some questions. 3 questions came to mind. The first question was, Charles Nelson talks about the construction of a framework. I wondered, what does the framework need in order to survive a metaphorical storm, for example? The second question was, is there one way a good framework can be built, or are there several? And the third question was, what happens if the framework is constructed in a wrong way? One of the most important things I've learned is that we should not underestimate how much is going on in the lives of young babies. Do not underestimate how much the brain is responding to everything that's going on around it. In a positive way, to build a strong foundation, or in a disruptive way, to create a greater risk for problems later. By this, I mean not a guarantee for problems, but just a risk. I think this answers the third question I had, but it also raised a new question, which was, what influences the construction of a framework then? Later on, I will address this question, but for now, I would like to have a look at the first 2 questions I had. Starting with the second question I had. Is there one way a good framework can be built, or are there several? Of course, there is not one good way to raise a child. In my opinion, we should trust the instincts of the parents as much as we can. By parents, I mean everyone who is responsible for raising a child. I believe that every parent has the right intentions with their child, and that this will never change over time. Looking at the mission of the Dutch City Health Department, they also focus on the parent to be self-reliant. Eventually, the parents are the ones who have to do it, right? Which brings me to my first question. What does a framework need to create a strong construction? I believe that every framework should always consist of 3 pillars. Or either, I believe that every upbringing of every child should contain 3 things: safety, stability, and trust. I think those 3 things are necessary to build a strong construction. I will discuss every pillar briefly. I spoke to Dionne van Wezenbeek, internal supervisor for childcare at the Dutch City Health Department. She showed me this pyramid about the development of adhesion between a parent and a child. This pyramid shows the development of adhesion in a positive or a negative way. I see the pyramid as a phased, step-by-step plan which works bottom-up. Let's have a look at it. The foundation of the pyramid represents a crossroad with two options. The development of adhesion based on safety, or either the development of adhesion based on fear. If parents do not provide a safe upbringing, a child will not feel safe. Instead, it will feel the opposite. It will feel fear. If a child feels frightened, it will be held back in the rest of the adhesion process, but not only in the adhesion process. Research shows that when a child feels frightened, it focuses so much on making sure they're safe that they're held back from developing social skills, developing their brain, and discovering their surroundings. The second layer is about trust, one of the three pillars I was talking about. If a child grows up in fear, it will likely develop mistrust. But if a child grows up feeling safe, it will also be able to trust people. So what happens in the second layer of the pyramid is depending on what happened in the first layer of the pyramid. That is why safety is essential in the upbringing of a child in order to develop, eventually, trust. I hear you wonder, why then stability as the third pillar? It's not even in the pyramid. Well, let me explain it to you. Stability is key within the adhesion process between a parent and a child. If there's no stability within the adhesion process, the relationship between a parent and a child could falter or even get broken. In my opinion, stability should be an overall priority within the upbringing of children, especially with the growing influences of the societal playfield, which I will address later on. During my research, I did a lot of desk and field study. While conducting this research, I came across a lot of opinions about what the framework at least needed to consist of. This made me experience how much there is to find about the upbringing of children, both online and offline. I decided to look into this because I could imagine that when a parent experiences how much various information there is to find about the upbringing of children, that this could create quite some insecurity. Which brings me to my question about what influences the construction of a framework, or either what influences parents in their way of bringing up a child. An old African saying says, "It takes a village to raise a child." Even though this is a very old saying, I do not think it has lost its credibility over the years. I think this phrase has a connection with the triangle of the societal playfield. I would like to explain why. Here you see the triangle. If we look at this triangle, we see that there are three players within the triangle of the societal playfield. The state, or either the government, the market, and the civil society. I think that all three players together have an influencing power on how parents bring up their children. I think that these three players form the village that raises the child. And I would like to discuss every influence of every player with you. Starting off with the Dutch state. The Dutch state has a lot of care organizations who are all financed by the Dutch government. During my research, I had a conversation with Monique Konings, policy advisor at the Dutch Association for Interaction Guidance and Home Care. This association has established a national policy network within the Netherlands amongst all care organizations who are involved in the upbringing of children. The methods they provide are engaged in daily care and well-being of youth, but also in daycare institutions, schoolings, and in adult care. Together with associations like Monique's, I see that the Dutch government tries to provide a stable and controlled influence on the way parents bring up their children. By, for example, acknowledging the importance of the first 1,000 days of a child and starting an action campaign, they showed their stable influence on parents. When I look at the media, the biggest influence on the market, I see the opposite happening. Instead of influencing parents in a stable and controlled way, the media creates, both online and offline, an unclear information stream about the upbringing of children. Because of this unclear information stream, I can imagine that parents find it hard to find the proper manner to provide a safe, stable, and trustworthy upbringing for their children. I think everyone will agree with me if I say that we live in the era of the media, right? Everyone has 24/7 access to every bit of information that there's out there, credible or not, about the upbringing of children. There are hundreds and thousands of books written about the upbringing of children. You can find a whole bunch of sites and blogs which all tell you how to raise your child in 10 steps. Or you can just go on YouTube and watch a 2-minute tutorial about everything there is to know about becoming a parent. I think the amount of information has increased enormously over the years. But also the way of how we process information has changed over the years. Monique told me that before the emerging influence of the media, her organization would organize these movie nights in theaters, where teachers, parents, doctors, etc. all could come together to gain information about, for example, the birth, the pregnancy, or the first contact with a child. Care organizations like Monique's had way more grip on the information stream that parents got about the upbringing of children than they have now. The requirements of the way information is shaped has changed over the years, which makes it difficult to retain a stable and controlled information stream towards parents about the upbringing of children. As well as in the market, I've seen some developments occur within our civil society as well. For example, the traditional role patterns within our Dutch families. During my research, I had a conversation with my grandparents about the time they were raised. They told me that back in the days, it was normal that the mother was fully responsible for the upbringing of their children. When a mother got a child, she stopped working and became a house mom. The father worked, earned money, and almost never interfered with the upbringing of his children. When the mother had a problem with her child, she'd go to the neighbors or to friends to ask for advice. But nowadays this is different. In almost every household, both of the parents are equally responsible for the upbringing of their children. And if parents have a problem with their child, they won't go to the neighbors or friends for advice anymore. They would go and search for it in the media, both online and offline. And here they would get in contact with all these different opinions about the best way to raise a child. I'm not saying that everything was better back in the days, regarding to the upbringing of children. I just wanted to give you some examples to show you the changing influences of the societal playfield over the years. And I think that these influences will always keep changing. Actually, they are already changing in my opinion. If we look at, for example, the corona crisis we are in now, I think that this will have a lot of influence on children on a later age due to the upbringing that they have now. Overall, I think the change of these influences will cause a lot of uncertainty amongst parents about the upbringing of children, which jeopardizes the ability of a parent to be self-reliant and to provide their children a safe, stable, and trustworthy upbringing. That is why, in the future, I would like to see how we can cope with these changing influences of the societal playfield in order to help parents provide their children a safe, stable, and trustworthy upbringing. Thank you for your attention.